This is us from 2014. This was my first Write the Docs conference, and I knew almost right away this was my tribe, and I thank you all for coming here. The reason? I mean, isn't this conference awesome? The reason it's awesome is because you all have empathy. I show empathy in a slightly different way in my technical documentation, so I'm going to tell you how I learned to stop worrying and love the command line. If you want to follow along, I have a couple of URLs for you. slides.com/mic-1/command-line. And if you want me to control your slides, /live. You never know what might happen. Time for a poll by a show of hands. Who here knows the CLI? Oh, that's a good number. You can teach your friends. Do you know colleagues who avoid the CLI? Yes. So, I mean, hopefully some of you are the same. If you're different and don't yet know the CLI, that's great. That's why you're here. Who wants to show empathy in your documentation? Good, good. I hope everybody's hand goes up for that. With the command line, you can do a little more. If you want to write for developers and systems administrators, and I emphasize that as well, people say you should learn to code, but I say you first need to learn to work with the command line. I show this to people every now and then, and sometimes I get a reaction. So anyway, in a title suggested, thank you, Tana Franco. It's a riff on a movie by Stanley Kubrick. The title is How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Or was it the command line? So anyway, a little bit about myself. I'm a tech writer for a company called ForgeRock. That means I write about identity and access management software. And I have a few credits on Amazon. You can look up my name. So, in the words of the immortal Dr. Strangelove, it's time to stop worrying and love the command line. But why? That requires a story. A couple of years ago, when we were hiring another writer, my boss asked me, hey, Mike, why don't you set up an AWS system so our good candidates could log on and do what you guys do every day? So I set up the system. I added our software, I added our prereq software, and set up some instructions. So I told people, hey, this is how you connect to our AWS system. A few people did this, and it felt like they ran screaming from our exam. I mean, it just blew my mind that people with 20 years of experience would look at this and say they couldn't do it. I think all of us need to have that kind of experience at the command line. And why? So you can show empathy for your developer sysadmin readers. But what is this empathy thing? I mean, why would you want to put on anybody else's shoes? You want to experience what they experience. So who are these readers, these developers and systems administrators? The one thing they have common is that they're command line geeks. So what's the fantasy with documentation? Happy geeks who look at your docs and say, your docs have everything I need. Game over. But what's the reality? What happens with most of our documentation? Somebody struggling with not enough time to learn your product who looks at your docs and says, oh my God, I guess I shouldn't do that. There's too much information here. Just give me the commands. So how do we get there? But first, a couple of disclaimers. This is an overview, not a tutorial. I can't teach you the command line in half an hour. What I can do is, in essence, give you a course outline, tell you what you need to know, plus give you some demos that show you why these things are important. So a little bit about my setup. I find it's important to emulate what our customers do in production. I find that most of our customers use Linux in production, so I set up my systems on Linux. My laptop here is a Linux laptop. I have VMs that are Linux, and I have remote systems that are Linux as well. You can set them up on Ubuntu systems. You can equally as well set them up on Red Hat systems. Red Hat Enterprise Linux was just released, and I think it's wonderful. I cite Ubuntu because it's convenient in a way. It comes from a Bantu word, Bantu in South Africa, which refers to humanity towards others. I mean, how more empathetic can you get? My working assumption here is that we're working with the bash shell. Bash is short for born again, and a shell is a quote-unquote command interpreter, which takes what you put at the command line and tells the operating system what to do. So I divide these command line skills into 6 categories, and we'll go through them. Secure connections. How do you connect your remote production systems securely? Your customers are going to have real-world conditions where they have virtual machines, EC2 systems, and whatever on remote locations. So when you set up your documentation and test your software, you should do the same. So with this simulation, which is a repeat, we're connecting to an EC2 system. We're doing it with an encryption key. You do that with an encryption key, you can connect to the remote system without sending your password over the internet. In contrast, you can also set up local virtual machines. And when you do that, it's probably okay to use your password because your password, unless there's something really wrong with your system, isn't going out over the internet. So what are the lessons here? You want to know, with the secure shell command, how to connect remotely with a private key. You want to know how to connect locally with a password. And once you do that, you've secured your communications. So here's your checklist with the SSH command. And once you learn how to use SSH, believe it or not, you're starting to become a hacker. Next on the list is navigation. To talk about navigation, I think about the hike. So who here was on the hike a couple days ago? A few of you, that's good. This is a picture from 3 years ago. My dog is in the picture. What do you do when you go on a hike? The first thing I do is I look for the hike map. I think, okay, where am I on this map? Where am I starting? Where am I going? And that's what I'm about to do with the command line. I'm connecting into my demo system with my password again. Just a little tip, the clear command brings everything back up to the top of the screen. And then I run the pwd command. pwd stands for print working directory. It says you are here, in this particular case, in the home/Mike directory. So once you're here, you're thinking, so what's here? That's when you want to list the local files. The ls command lists the files in the current directory. It returns those files. And for the sake of brevity, I'm going to jump further with the ls-ltr command, where you're listing the files in a long listing format with a time index in reverse chronological order. And if successful, this command will list all the files in the local directory with a lot more information with the newest file listed last. And just to make sure, yep, there it goes. So you see it has information about permissions on the file, the owner, when the file was last touched. So going on from here, we were talking about the hike. I'm told that the hike file in the write the docs repo is in a file called hike.rst. So I look for the file with the find command, starting with the local directory, and I find it in a bunch of places. But the hike happened a couple of days ago, so we know we're looking for the file from 2019. So we go to the directory with the command called cd, and I'll list all these commands at the end, and go into that directory. And now we want to find out, gee, what time did that hike? I did it again. With the grep command, you can search within the file with an index. In this case, an index called time. And we discover, wow, the hike left at 2 p.m. a couple of days ago. So now we know how, at least have the elements of how to get around, how to navigate. And once you learn how to navigate around the command line, you can direct your readers. You can set things up as, set up your software and say, hey, this is where you go to do things. In other words, with your documentation, you'll be setting up a GPS for your readers. Next, editing. Wherein lies the question? If you're new to the command line, you might first think, why not Microsoft Word? I mean, it's a great editor. The problem is, Microsoft Word and similar editors save their files in binary format. And when you read binary format, it looks like this. The strange thing is, it looks like this to your computer as well. Strange as it sounds, computers expect text in English. Why, I'm not sure, but when a computer sees a binary file, it does this. So if you want to do things like prepare code samples, configuration file samples, and so on, you'll want to use text editors. And while there are a lot of complicated ones out there, I'm going to introduce you to what I find is the most straightforward text editor, the Nano editor. And we'll use that to edit the hike.rst file. We'll open it up. We went into the directory as done earlier and open it up in the Nano editor. Once you open up a file in that, you realize, oh my gosh, I can use arrow keys and delete keys. It's actually intuitive, which seems unusual for a text editor. You can save it with Control X, and voila, you've edited your first text file. Lessons here: never use Microsoft Word when editing a text file. Nano is a great option. When you talk to developers, there'll be an everlasting debate on whether an editor called VI or Emacs is better. And I could go into another talk on that. What a lot of people end up using are quote-unquote integrated development environments, IDE. I have 3 excellent recommendations up here. And once you start using text editors, you're showing empathy in another angle. Next is package management. What's a package? It's a group of files and the like put together for a single program. You'll find packages in a number of formats. These are the typical extensions you'll find for different packages in Linux, Unix, Mac, and so on. When a developer looks at all these packages, especially in places like GitHub, he sees opportunities, he sees presence, he sees things he can do. Or I should be using some gender-neutral verb or pronoun. But the problem with all these different packages is that you need to find the right tool. Every package requires a different tool. So I'm going to demonstrate a couple of them. Some of them are straightforward. If you have a file with a zip extension, you can unzip it. If you have a file that's known as a tarball, and it's called a tarball for weird reasons, you can use a command called tar to pack it and unpack it. If you have packages for Linux and Unix systems with extensions like RPM, DEB, and PKG, it's usually best to use the respective package managers because there are things called dependencies that can mess things up. So we'll demonstrate a couple of these package managers. And if I know how to click, I can get this particular thing started. I connect back into my demo system. I list the files in the system, and we're going to be dealing with two specific files. One is IDM-6.5, which is a software that I deal with on a daily basis, and we see that it's a zip file, so that should be straightforward. There's also a Postman package in a tar format. So let's go to the IDM package and unzip it. And in a moment, it'll unzip a whole bunch of files. But looking at the output, you can see that it's all done into a open IDM subdirectory. So you can go into that directory, look around, and see what it unpacked. And that becomes the first step whenever you're exploring any new package and any new software. See what's there. And now let's do the same sort of thing with the Postman package. Some of you may know Postman as the package associated with running REST calls for RESTful APIs. I ran that a little too fast, but I won't worry too much about the details, but in essence, you can run a series of switches with the tar command to unpack the Postman package, and you'll find the results in a Postman subdirectory, and you can look around there as well. So when you learn to manage packages, you'll learn to run these kinds of commands on a nearly everyday basis. The surprising thing about this list is that even Microsoft Windows has a package manager. I mean, who knew that they would get into the game like this? And once you learn how to deal with package managers, you can look at packages and think, oh my gosh, I've got opportunities here. So what are the lessons here? When you learn how to deal with packages, you can start telling people, hey, here's how you open up our software, how to manage it, how to set things up. Also, you could work with software of others. I mean, I don't know how many of you heard Shannon's talk earlier today, but once you learn these skills, you can start to build your portfolio. With these skills, you can go to GitHub READMEs and actually open up their packages, play with them, and see if their documentation actually works. So next is a topic that could take months of discussion. I'm going to discuss it in under 5 minutes. How, I'm not sure, but the first thing that happens when you talk about Git and a Git repository is people talk about cloning. I hear the word clone, and I think of Dolly the sheep. If you remember her from 1996, they cloned her. So with Git, you can clone repositories. And if you want to start by contributing to the Write the Docs website, you can clone the Write the Docs repository. In the upper right, you see this little bit, Fork Me on GitHub. If you click that, it'll take you to the GitHub page for the Write the Docs repository, which I'll try to demonstrate here. We select the Fork Me on GitHub link. That takes us to GitHub/Write the Docs, I think, well, whatever, it takes you to the right link, and you copy what you get from the clone button. And we'll clone it at the command line to a local repository. So I do this in my demo system. If I did this correctly, I clear my screen, I set up a git repo subdirectory for the purpose, and I run the git clone command to bring the files of the Write the Docs repository into my local system. We'll use that in a moment. And yes, this is a long list of commands to learn with respect to Git, but Git is a process, and once you learn how to deal with these commands, you can start thinking, oh my gosh, I might have the skills to do docs as code. So anyway, let's do some of these commands that I just listed. We're checking out and creating a new branch, which is a branch that's safe from the regular Write the Docs repository, and we'll do a little bit of editing. What I've just done is I'll open up the main file with the number of meetups we have. Some of you may know me as somebody who does meetups for Write the Docs, and recently I discovered we have 42 meetups. I mean, it just blows my mind. So I go in there, I do a little editing, I save the file, and I run a commit message. Hopefully your commits will be more descriptive than that, because commit history is important when people say, what happened with the documentation, with your code base? They'll look over your history. And when you want to push things, you can git push, and the intent is to push to a remote version of your repository. But then I discover, oh my gosh, we have another meetup. So I have to correct this and say, in over 42 cities. But actually, we're still at 42 cities, but I was hopeful. So I make the change, I make another commit message with something else that's appropriately descriptive. And even though that was blocked, I'm going to show you the messages I just had. We had some new change and more changes. One thing that people consider a good practice is to rebase and squash commits, so you have one commit per change. And I just showed you very quickly the process, and I'm not going to explain it any further in the essence, or because 30 minutes is a short amount of time to talk about all this. So anyway, now that you've gone through all this, I'm going to show you how my dog Katie, who is 14, practices her Git. And there she goes. It's remarkable that she's still able to do that at 14. Katie gets the applause, I don't mind. Once you have these skills in hand, you too can start to manage docs like code. What does that mean? It means that you'll be able to manage your documentation like a developer manages their code. Last on the list is scripts. What's a script? Well, that's not quite what I'm talking about. A script is a series of commands put together in a single file, packaged, if you will. And once you package things together, you can say, hooray, I have a script. To demo this, I go back to the Write the Docs GitHub repository, and it includes a README with the instructions on how to set things up so you can have a local copy of the Write the Docs website. Not because you want to do it locally, but because you want to see the changes you've made, how they actually look before you push things to the website itself. So I've taken all these commands and put them together. I start with the bang, exclamation point, bin bash to say it's a bash script, and then I put the commands together in the same sequence you'll find in the README, because it's a well-written README. I save it into a file named WTD test page. I've made the file executable, and it runs a whole bunch of commands and gives you a whole bunch of messages. But at the end, once it's ready, it'll say, hey, you can see what's happening with the Write the Docs website on a page named, or let's try that again, on localhost :8888. And once you do that, you can see, okay, local meetups in 40 cities. Let's change that. You saw how we changed that earlier in the nanotext editor, and we'll do that again with the script in motion. We changed that to over 42 cities, and I hope we'll get there soon. We'll save the file and go back. I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. Go to the other terminal and discover, oh my gosh, the script is helping to reread all the changes that were just made. And voila, we have a Write the Docs website that says local meetups in over 42 cities. So what's the lesson from this? If you have a bunch of commands that you're running frequently, simplify. Put it all together in a script. And when you do that, I have a little secret for you. If you're scripting, you're doing programming. I mean, what's the essence of programming but putting things together in a program? That wasn't said quite as well as I thought, but anyway. With that, we have our 6 essential command line skills, which can serve as a checklist. And because I was limited to 30 minutes, we have a bunch of supplemental command line skills that you can learn. Yes, I know it may seem daunting, but these are the skills that I think can help you write for developers as well. What are the benefits of this? You're able to write documentation with the information your readers need. And once you do that, you're feeling the empathy for your readers, and you're able to transform your docs, if you remember a couple of the earlier pictures, from this to this. And I hope that's what we all want. And once you know how to do all this, you're able to start implementing Docs as code on your own systems. And if you're doing Docs as code, you're feeling empathy at least for the developers who are with you, who are also using tools like Git and other command line tools. And it'll give you opportunities to do more as documentarians. So with that, I guess I should turn this over to the real star of this show. Let's see here. Katie's 14. This is from a year ago. And she learned this trick for the first time at age 13. Basically taking the cookie on her nose and flipping it in her mouth. Let's try it again, and voila. And with that, I will speak for Katie and say, you too can learn to love the command line.